Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hi and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for joining me and my guest today, Daphne Lazar Price. How are you, Daphne?
I'm doing very well, thank God. How are you?
I'm great. Do people call you Daphne or Daphne?
Oh, Daphne. That's a that is a serious point of contention that I went through and still go through newly developed relationships. For sure in my childhood where people were like, it can't be, both from Israelis and from, my like Haredi teachers who said, no, it has to be Daphne. And I said, no, my parents named me Daphne or Daphne.
Okay. So we'll
Yeah.
call you all of the above, I guess. My name is Avrum by my family's standards.
Mhm.
People call me Avrum. Some people call me Avrum. And I recently started in Toronto. I tell people my name is Abraham. So I've also gone through a huge crisis I can identify.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show is all about honoring humankind. And we do so by having very inspiring guests on. What I would like very much for you to do is, before we get into this interview, I want you to think about what it is that you are passionate about. When we say that you're in the zone, where does that take you? And if you are struggling to get into that place, then listen to my guest today, who has a fascinating background, which we'll share with you in a moment, and is a highly inspiring individual. We live in a beautiful, beautiful place called Earth. And our creativity and the development of the self has gone so far in 5,000 years, in 6 billion years, however you qualify it, in terms of the amount of people who are suffering medically, as they used to when I was growing up. The old adage is, well, you better eat that because there's children suffering in China. That has cut down, that has diminished enormously. In terms of people who are developing, their cost of living is generally high in the Western world, but outside of it, bringing up the quality of their life, that is changing dramatically. And it is because we are doing many of the right things, and we need to be cognizant of that. So let's dive in to the interview today with Daphne Lazar Price. Now, Daphne, beautifully, is Canadian. Grew up not far from where I am. I'm at Shepherd and Bathurst. She was up at Rockford, which is above Finch and Bathurst, if you know the area. And her dad and her sister still live here. She is the executive director of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance and an adjunct professor of Jewish law at Georgetown University Law Center. She is what we would call, in simple terms, an Orthodox feminist. Would that be accurate, Daphne?
That would be 100% accurate.
Okay, so you're okay with labels then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you're going up in an elevator with someone, they go, oh, what are your commitments to life? What do you love? Well, I happen to be an Orthodox feminist. You would say that.
100%. 100%. I say it all the time.
What is the outcome of saying that very often?
A lot of curiosity. A lot of time, people don't associate orthodoxy and feminism together. Sometimes a little bit of bristling because people don't associate or you can't be so orthodox that you're feminist. You can't be so feminist that you're orthodox. People really struggle with making sense of the two. And other times, a sense of nodding and appreciation, because I think that there are many women in the Orthodox community and many people in the Jewish community who want to be supportive of Orthodox women, who are grateful that the work of JOFA exists and that there are women who are leading the way in their communities in big and small ways, really advancing the role of Orthodox women in Orthodox communities and in the world writ large.
When you say Orthodox communities, you don't mean Haredi communities.
What I mean is anywhere where an Orthodox woman, is struggling in her community,
Mhm.
whether it's because she's erased from publications, or the mechitza in her shul is non-existent, or is terrible, or she gets a note from her yeshiva league son's baseball coach saying, "We're not allowing any women, including mothers and sisters, to come and watch." Um, However, it doesn't matter to me how they identify. They often come to us for ideas, for language and tools of how to um, roll back those kind of, they're not advancements. They're whatever the word is, to roll back those roles in their communities, or to make positive change so that girls and women can fully participate in their communities, whatever that means in that
Have you
community.
had Haredi women approach you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
You have.
They, I will say, Haredi women, also a lot of Chabad women resonate with the work, because Chabad women in general, the shluchot also, are shluchas, sorry, are are very empowered to go and be out in the world, and don't always have the language and the tools of halachic knowledge,
Mm.
and so they don't always have um, the language to respond. When they ask the question, "Why is it this way?" and they're told, "Because that's what it is. That's what the Torah says," and they're like, they don't have the skills and the knowledge to go and be like, "Well, actually, I read so and so different, and or this pasuk different, and this is why it hasn't always been the way, and isn't actually the way."
Let's back up a little bit in terms of your own development as a Jew, as a woman, as a human being. As I said before, you're from Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Hmm.
Your mother was Leah, God bless her soul. She passed away at an early age of 61.
Hmm.
Your dad is Moshe. He should live a long life.
I mean.
Amen. And he lives here in Toronto. Your sister spends a lot of time with him,
Hmm.
which is really nice. And then you have a brother in Woodmere.
Hmm.
So you grew up as an Orthodox Jew?
I grew up I started off the first 9, 10 years of my life in a secular Israeli but traditional home,
Mhm.
meaning we lit candles Friday night at whatever time, not when Shabbat started, but because it was Shabbat dinner, and bought challah from Open Window Bakery, which
Right.
was not a kosher bakery,
But good call.
um, but good challah.
Yeah.
Also great bagels, as I remember,
Great bagels.
and 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 but we went to the beach on Saturday, or watched Saturday morning cartoons, and that was kind of the norm until, like I said, I was around like 9 or so. We moved onto a block that with many, many, many families, all of whom the children went to shul on Shabbos, because all the families were Orthodox. So all of a sudden, my brother and I would tag along with them, and which meant that de facto we stopped watching Saturday morning cartoons because we went to shul and youth groups with them, and there are all kinds of tiny incremental changes. Also, my parents sent us to Associated, which at the time, I don't know what it is now. At the time, the student population was fairly traditional. The teachers were all from, we had a lot of Israeli imports who taught us Ivrit B'Ivrit. And my parents were aware that there was some mixed messaging, that we would go to school and learn one thing, like September, we learned all about Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot and Simchas Torah. And like maybe Rosh Hashanah, we went to shul and had apple and honey, but we certainly never had a sukkah. And I'm not sure that we went to shul for Simchas Torah. So they were a little bit concerned about those kinds of mixed messages. And then my parents became involved with the Chabad community in Toronto. There was like a growing Israeli, well, there still is, but at the time there was a big Israeli community in Toronto that was just their chevra, and like just socially they kind of liked what Chabad had to offer. And then one day they decided that it was time to kasher the kitchen. So at the time, the only show in town to kasher your kitchen was Chabad, and then they kind of bought into it hook, line, and sinker. So overnight we went from ordering Big Macs without the cheese because we didn't mix milk and meat, to all of a sudden having chalav Yisrael only in the fridge, and it was a pretty radical change pretty quickly. Um, they were, like I said, pretty Chabad. I don't know how much you remember. I know that you went to a certain school that moved quickly, probably right after you graduated to Richmond Hill or to north of Richmond Hill.
Mhm.
But in that time zone, Chabad was in trailers on what became Chabad Gate. There was like a tent and trailers, and then eventually they built the shul there at 770 Chabad Gate, which is just funny because it's an even number on the odd side of the street, and like the numbers across the street are like in the single digits. So
Mhm.
they clearly got the permits for this address. And we walked in the winter and in the summer, both very extreme temperatures in my childhood, from Rockford and Bathurst up to Thornhill, and that became my my shul, even though B'nai Torah was a block the other way, down on Patricia.
By the way, there's a clicking happening on your side. Not sure
Oh,
if you.
I'm so sorry. You know what it
Okay.
is? It's my microphone and my dog
Yeah, no,
tags.
it's all good. It's all good. Do you remember those walks in the cold of the
Oh
winter?
my God, they were so cold. Like we
You
would
remember those?
Yes, we would walk out and it would be freezing cold and we would tear up and then the tears would freeze in our eyelashes. It was
Right.
so cold.
Right. I'm from Kitchener. So
Yep.
prior to moving to Toronto to go to yeshiva, which you mentioned,
Hmm.
yes, I would walk to shul with my father and back, and Kitchener's in the snow belt. So, we used to say, as many people do, it was like 50 below, and we had to walk miles uphill, to shul. And of course, somehow we had to walk uphill going home as well. You
Yep.
know?
Yep. Uphill both ways. Just like Little House on the Prairie that we used to watch
Exactly.
after school,
I
right?
remember you're a little one and you're just trudging. You go, oh my God, I just want to be there already,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. And
Right.
I used to play all these like number games in my head of counting steps and skipping cracks in the
Yes.
sidewalks, and if I got to this light and this house, then I would have this
Right.
much less to go. But it was so painful. And the truth is, the summer wasn't much better. It was
No.
just hot. So yeah, I mean,
Did you
yeah.
skate?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I was born on ice skates.
You were?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where did you go skating?
We went mostly to Goulding, every now and again to Centennial, but for whatever reason, we liked the ice better at Goulding. Once in a while, we would go downtown to Nathan Phillips Square just to like check the box to say that we skated outside. And I remember like once or twice, probably going on some kind of Shabbaton ice skating in Ottawa on the Rideau Canal. But ice skating was my thing. We also had Earl Bale Park. I went to Opana, which is a funny choice for my parents. But my parents were adamant that I go to university, and so going to Beis Yaakov would not have made that easy or possible, probably. So I went to Opana.
A
Also, my
Mizrahi
parent.
girls' school.
Yes, thank you. It's a B'nai Akiva high school. Opana is the girls' branch. Orchaim is the boys' branch. Staunchly Zionist, which is also another thing that my parents were not ready to give up. Were staunch Zionists. Anyway, but so around the corner from Opana was Earl Bales Park. So we used to go after school once in a while to snow. I don't know if you ever skied there, but there was a single slope with a T-bar at the time. Actually, also a
Still is.
chairlift.
Still
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
still is. So
I,
yeah,
I'm
so
trying to figure. I'm trying to figure out what your parents were like. They were Israelis. They made what you called Yerida, and they
mhm.
ended up in Toronto, and they mostly stayed there. Um, Explain to me the type of Israeli that they are and were
Oh gosh. Okay,
in,
so my
in
mother,
terms of
first of
in
all,
terms of their Judaism.
yeah. So like I said, they started off very traditional. Also, at the time in Toronto, there was, if you're looking at like kashrut, it was everything. Like unless you were like, I'm only eating things with hashgacha, everything was kosher by ingredient, and you got your chicken and your meat wherever. Nobody really questioned
Yeah.
what glatt was until they became Chabad, and then all of a sudden that became like a thing. But in their Israeliness, my mother was a phenomenal cook.
Was
So
she?
yes, she would touch like the plainest vegetable and turn it into gold.
Mhm.
So every Shabbat was um 8, 10 different salatim. Like the way that you would walk into an Israeli restaurant in Israel and you would order your grilled pargiot and they give you like your 12 salads, that would be my parents' house every Shabbos. And that brought change into the Chabad community because the palettes then were just much more simple. Now you have like cookbooks, every other day a new fancy cookbook coming out. My mother was she was such a inspiration culinarily wise in many ways. She was the queen of chesed and was the first to volunteer for everything, which I think is also what drew her to Chabad, is that she felt like she had purpose and a role and was needed. But one of the things when my mother passed away, women from all over the province, from downtown Toronto to St. Catharines to name it. I should say actually the Greater Toronto area. They didn't so much come from like Ottawa or other places, but came to pay a shiva call and really thanked me for how wonderful my mother was, how she taught them how to make her first whatever, because she did cooking demonstrations
Mm.
at every Chabad house, at every like Nishei Chabad event. Um, every house that had an Neshei Chabad in the Greater Toronto area, and women who like places that I never knew had a Chabad, or that women were drawn from those towns to their nearby Chabad, came from all over the place, and it was really a testament to her generosity. She was also a mikveh attendant,
Mhm.
and also the number of women who shared stories about. There's one woman in particular who she was a mother of many children and got to the mikveh at 10:30 p.m. just as my mother was getting ready to leave, and the woman came in like in tears and breathless, and my mother just said to her, she told me, she said, your mother put her hands on my shoulders and said, just take your time,
Mm.
it's okay, just
Mhm.
go. And also Bikur Cholim, I can tell you that when I don't remember the exact age. I was too young to drive, but old enough to go by myself. There was a senior citizen assisted living center called Cheltenham at the time. I think it's something else now.
Still there. Mhm.
Yeah. So 1 year over Sukkot, she handed me a lulav and esrog over Holomoid, handed me lulav and esrog, and like 3 pieces of paper stapled together, and said, "You're going to go to Cheltenham, and you're going to bench lulav and esrog with all of the Jewish patients who are there." Now, maybe I was 14 again, like old enough to go by myself, but not old enough to drive. I walk over, and I'm like, this is not my comfort zone. I'm comfortable everywhere, and I think now probably I would be perfectly fine going into an assisted living facility doing this kind of thing. But as a 14-year-old girl, also this is like the era of the older people. There are a lot of Shoah survivors who just it was just so much emotion. And for that minute, thanks to my mother saying, "I'm not giving you a choice, you're just going," I brought a minute of joy and nostalgia and some sadness, I think, too, for bringing up memories of what once was to this group of people. So that was the kind of that was the home. And there was also a real rigidity and strictness. So like I wasn't allowed to talk to boys, I wasn't allowed to wear pants, I wasn't allowed to wear short sleeves. Which, if you send your kid to high school in a Bnei Kiva high school, also tends to be confusing and at times difficult. It just means like socially that I either stay home or lie and go out with my friends because everybody else was doing all the co-ed things. So, right, Marky's on a Saturday night was the thing to do.
Yes.
So yeah, that was, more or less the experience in my childhood.
What do you see very clearly inside of you from your mom?
I aspire to be as good a cook.
Yes.
I, yeah, for my mother also, like, showing love a lot of times was through food. And so, or just through generosity. When she passed away, everybody was like, whatever we do, we need to do b'shefa. And it became like a little bit overkill. So like, when it comes to having company for Shabbat, if there aren't leftovers, I worry that I didn't make enough
Mhm.
or that people didn't like my food. Um, uh, I think I get from her the urge to volunteer first and often wherever I can, um, in big and small ways. And What I didn't take from her, my mother did everything with great anivut. She never wanted any recognition, never anything, and I live a little more out loud. So I don't know how she would feel about that today.
When you
But
say out loud, do you like accolades?
um, I don't like false accolades. But I also think that people should be recognized for the good
Yeah.
that they do. It doesn't have to be over the top.
It's kind of interesting what you're saying because my parents, my father was born in 28, my mother was born in 1930. my father was a rabbi. Obviously, my mother was a rebbitzin. But the truth of the matter is, humility was defined in those days as you really don't talk about your successes, right? I think that's changed in our day and age.
I definitely think that's changed in our day and age. I also think if you don't talk about your successes and you want to be like, it's hard to gain more success. And I don't mean success like, look how amazing she is, but
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
fact that people call me to be like, I know that you're involved in this, that, and the other. Do you think you can lend an afternoon, an hour? Do you think you can take on a role as a leader? Like, I think that like when you talk about the good you do, it puts more good into the world and it puts you in a position to bring more good into the world.
It's really interesting to look at your resume because there's great pieces in there in terms of your response to Judaism, more specifically, women in the Orthodox community.
Mhm.
But at some point in time, you were working with girls as part of a group called Girls on the Run.
Mhm.
Like you had a group of these young girls who clearly were having problems in their life, right?
So I wouldn't say that they were having problems with their life. Girls on the Run is it's an international program for girls in grades 4, 5, and 6. And the idea is that they're without their screens, they're out running, and there's also some like body positivity and group building. I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I thought it's because I worked with the homeless.
Uh-huh.
And when we say someone's on the run, it means they ran away from their home.
Ah, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. These are not at-risk youth. Some of them might be at-risk youth, and some of them might be
Okay.
looking for a way to. I mean, they're mostly in school with each other, but for a way to kind of find a way to shine in their own way. And it's a 10 or 12 week program. You do it through a school, and and then at the end there's a 5K, and everybody's a winner. And so even the kid who finishes last, like the joke is, what is the person who finishes last in your med school class? But what do you call them? You call them doctor, right? Everybody here walks out with a medal, and just this sense of accomplishment that they've done this thing that not every 11-year-old would think to set out to do a 5K, and it's really a wonderful thing.
So
And I'll just say that in some communities, it is for at-risk communities. In the community that I did it, it's not at risk.
you see, I was trying to bolster you. I was trying to push you.
Ah, no. I actually think that there is also a special place to raise up young girls who have the potential to be to be athletic and don't always have that outlet or the realization that they can do so. This is a non-competitive space. And so some girls all of a sudden realize that they really love running and that they can do this and do it well, and they wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity if they were, if they would never try, if nobody ever said, come and run. There are no tryouts, right? Like once you get to middle school and high school, if you're in a school that has sports team, there are tryouts and not everybody gets in.
So interesting how it seems that you were born or at least raised to give. I think we were within our communities. I have a very similar background to you, although you're Orthodox and I'm not. But I think the central focus of our upbringing was tikkun olam, was v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. One should love their brother and the sister as themselves. So you attach yourself to it, and you actually went with that.
I did. We would not have called it Tikkun Olam then. It probably
Yes.
would have been a Chesed project. But it was like it was just easy. It just came natural. Sometimes with work, sometimes a lot of work, and sometimes disappointment. And sometimes I'm sure that I disappoint people. But it was like till this day, if I have the ability to, whatever it is, to pick up somebody at the airport, to contribute a few dollars, to volunteer to lead, a specific program, to write a tech study for somebody, whatever it is, to teach, to learn, whatever it is, if I have the ability to do it, I'm so happy to do it.
Is your husband and two girls like that?
Definitely. Absolutely. I have two daughters, actually. We do. They're both in Israel right now. One of them is finishing 11th grade at an international boarding school in Israel. The other one just drafted in the army about 3-4 weeks ago. And so both of them, their instinct is to give and to do in different ways. But they also, like, throughout middle school, and the older one when she was here throughout high school, the younger one until she left this high school, where there were opportunities to volunteer, they stepped up every time. My younger daughter also, interestingly, shows her love through food, often by baking, and, like, very thing
Like Bobby.
like Bubby,
Yeah.
yes. Well, Safta. Um, uh, and she's phenomenally talented. And my older one, is showing up by literally giving her body to the Israeli government to say, "I am in the army now for the next 2-3 years," and Hineni.
Wouldn't it have been tough if one of your daughters was not giving?
Um, I don't know how to answer that. It would bother me um, if they were uninterested in the world around them. I
Yeah.
think that giving comes and goes in different waves and shows up in different ways. And My spouse grew up in a lot of ways in a very similar household to mine, where also his parents were the first to volunteer. His mother is still alive; his father passed away. And she, till this day, is the first to volunteer for everything. Actually, in a lot of the same ways that my mother did when she was alive. And he's the one who will give, the shirt off his back, the last $5 in his wallet to anybody who needs it.
We were introduced through your best friend, your bestie, Neshama Karlbach.
Hmm.
I did an interview with her. I did one with her husband, Menachem Creditor, as well. And they're both very fine people.
They are.
They tell great stories.
They
So they were
do.
they were really good guests. The interesting thing about your best friend is that she was brought up Orthodox, and she went to all the typical Orthodox schools here in Toronto, very Orthodox.
Hmm.
But ultimately, today, she is no longer Orthodox, right? She's
Hmm.
traditional.
Hmm.
She embraces Judaism as
I call her joyfully Jewish. I think she calls herself joyfully Jewish.
which is a great alliteration, joyfully
Hmm.
Jewish. But you are Orthodox. So my
Yes.
question to you is, you know, having worked for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism,
Hmm.
was there a time where you changed denominations or just said, you know what, I'm not interested, I'm just a person?
I mean, I think I'm always a person, and I hate the word "just" because it's a limiting word. Um,
I like there are people who qualify themselves. I've met many Jews in my day. Where do you fit in the Jewish spectrum? You know what? I'm just a guy. That's what I mean. In other words, did
so
you ever give up your orthodoxy?
So the answer is no. I never give up my orthodoxy. And when people ask me now where and how I affiliate, I say I'm Orthodox. That's it. It never. There's a lot of good that I learned from working in the Reform movement. Um, uh, the joke was that I was Reformed by day and Orthodox by night. When everybody said it'd be more fun to be the other way around.
That's good. I like that.
um, but it was, I learned, look, the truth is, when I took the job, I took it on a whim. I had moved down to this area. I spent 2 years in New York at Bernard Revel at Yeshiva University, and I met my spouse on my one and only blind date. And he was coming back. He's a born and bred Washingtonian, so he was coming back here. Neither one of us had any interest in staying in New York. And I applied for 3 jobs, all in the Jewish community. Got all 3. One was in the Washington Jewish Historical Society, which was the one that made the most sense for me if you look at my academics. But I was like, nah, that actually didn't feel like what I wanted to do at the time. One in development at the American Jewish Committee, which I didn't really want to do fundraising. And then I got this offer from the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And I'd never known Reform Jews in real life. I grew up in Toronto, where we called Holy Blossom the Church on the Hill.
Yeah.
I don't think I was a Jewish Studies major at York University, but I don't think I actually had any Reform identifying or affiliate. Like, to me, the people who went to Holy Blossom went because that was where they had their bar bat mitzvah or confirmation or whatever they did. But it's not like they were like pulled to Reform Judaism. When I went to work at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, it was the first time that I actually met Reform Jews who were invested in Reform Judaism. And that was kind of life changing in a lot of ways for me. It really gave me like new insight to Jews of different stripes. and Jews who were committed to being in a movement different than the one that I had been raised in. Like, to me, being an Orthodox Jew was all about keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos, all the mitzvahs, all, what that you lived in a community, because it was in walking distance to the shul that you either did or didn't go to,
Right.
but right, that was it. And then all of a sudden, I step into this world of the Reform movement, and I'm open to this concept of tikkun olam, which is not a concept that we had been raised with at all, right? If we like, the only times that I ever said the words, which was really every day, was in Aleinu,
Right.
where we talked about the tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, right? But like that wasn't a concept like that. It wasn't a life driving concept. It
Mhm.
was words that we said in Aleinu, and if you study now in Gittin, that you could see that tikkun olam means something entirely different. But as a worldview concept, tikkun olam was something that I was not aware about at all. And so all of a sudden, to find out that Jews are so deeply engaged in with the government, with other faith communities, with or on issues where they're working with other like-minded organizations to build diverse coalitions, or actually not even like-minded, but the more diverse the coalition, the stranger the bedfellow, the more likely that you were able to get a piece of legislation passed or raise awareness on an issue or change, put an end to a policy or whatever it was. And that was a really important and powerful moment for me to realize, how things get changed in Washington, D.C., and that it's not just about Jews and the power that we yield, but that every minority, every community, every faith-based tradition, anybody who's interested in a given topic, whether it's gun violence prevention or prevention of violence against women or anything in the economic justice realm or environments, everybody can step in and have a voice and make the choice to do so. And where I worked at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, it opened up the possibility for Jews from across the United States to be able to say, I care about this issue, and I'm going to, put my voice behind the Religious Action Center.
That was your response to the Reform Judaism, and I had a similar one.
Mm-hmm.
It was real mind blowing when I figured out that there are a ton of Jews out there who deeply care about their Judaism, but not halachically.
Not
Yeah,
halachically. So that was you asked me about if I ever decided to not be Orthodox. I actually love halacha, even the halachot that I don't love.
Jewish
I
law.
love Jewish law, thank you. I love the process of exploring the development of Jewish law and to see sometimes where it helps and sometimes where it went awry. If we look at what we call the Aguna crisis, the Jewish divorce crisis, where women are left lingering because they have a spouse who won't give them a divorce. And in Jewish law, it's the man that has to initiate and give the divorce, right? There's a lot of, in our current state of the world, there's a lot of brokenness around that. And if we had rabbis who were brave and who would act within the framework of halacha, would be able to free these women without having to rely on a recalcitrant husband who often is recalcitrant because he's abusive in so many other ways, and we only really talk about in the Jewish community often when it comes to get abuse, which is that Jewish divorce abuse.
How did the Reformed Jews relate to you at the center?
Oh, with wonder and curiosity. First of all, for 15 years, the first 15 years that I worked there, I covered my hair. And so as soon as you walk in and you see a woman in a beret or a tichel, I never wore a sheitel, not because I'm ideologically opposed to sheitels, wigs, but because there's something heebie-jeebie about putting somebody else's hair on mine.
Mhm.
As soon as I walked in, people would recognize that there was an Orthodox woman, or they would be like, they would question his curiosity. Um, Initially, the story goes that initially, when I was hired, they knew that I was qualified and overqualified for the work. They didn't understand why I wanted it. They thought that maybe I was engaging in some industrial espionage for the OU.
Yeah.
And so initially they kept me at arm's length, for maybe like the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. I don't remember. I don't. Can't even tell you exactly. It was so long ago. And then after they realized, like, no, I was here for real, to do this work. And so there was some curiosity. I will say a lot of respect, but also a lot of disrespect that happened. Not from people well, sometimes people who I worked with, but when I would meet people for the first time, and they would say, I see you're always wearing a beret. What is that? And I would say, oh, I'm Orthodox and I'm married and this is my custom. And they'd be like, oh, not Orthodox, anything but that. But because they also had such terrible experience with some Orthodox people in their lives, whether it's because, they went to a school where the teacher was Orthodox and unkind, or they had some relative who was Orthodox and unkind. And so, they had that negative association.
I was really surprised. I was with one of the rabbis from Holy Blossom a number of years ago. He has since passed away. God bless his soul.
Was it Rabbi Plout?
It wasn't Rabbi Plout, although I have a funny Rabbi Plout story. I'll tell you real quickly. I started an organization called Via Hafta, and we were a Jewish humanitarian organization, still are, and we help people of all backgrounds, homeless. We worked in Zimbabwe, we worked in Guyana, did a lot of work with the AJWS, American Jewish World Service, and the Joint. Anyways, one night I was taking Rabbi Plout to help. We have a van, and volunteers go out in the van. And I looked at him. I was deep awe of him because Rabbi Plout was a very auspicious person. And I said, Rabbi, I'm so honored to have you go out in our van. I'm looking in the rear view mirror, and he looks at me. He goes, Avrum, cut the shit. You wouldn't hear from an Orthodox rabbi, but I like that ever since. But another rabbi, Rabbi Dov Marmer, he started telling me how critical he was of many things happening within the Orthodox community. And it struck me, it doesn't just go one way. Like, I was brought up hearing the Orthodox be very critical of reform and conservative. And then I'm thinking, oh, it does go both ways.
Yeah. So also in Toronto, what's interesting is where Holy Blossom is at the time anyway, it was kind of in the thick of where the Jewish community was. It was a little south, right? But but as the Jewish community moved farther north and north, it just created an actual physical divide. So I don't know, like, when the breach in Toronto happened, but you could go your whole life living in Toronto and never really talking to a Jew of another denomination. And the fact that we often say that proximity really just changes everything, but even when things were like more proximate, I don't know when the rift happened or what caused it, or if it was something that came from Europe and was so deeply ingrained once people moved to Toronto and they were like, no, we're going to call Holy Blossom the Church on the Hill, and we're going to be Viewmount and Shar Shemaim, and we're going to do, all the other shows Chabad that came later.
The Orthodox synagogues,
yes, the Orthodox synagogues, and we're just going to stay separate. It's the criticism runs on both sides, and when you hear it from the other side, you're like, I didn't realize those. We know the differences. We don't always realize how they're perceived as shortcomings. And in the reform movement, if you ask people in the reform movement today, there's a lot of. I will say that the reform movement is good at a lot of things and has made a lot of advancements, and there's still room to go and room to grow. And in the Orthodox community, there have been moves for advancement, and we're often, as I say, especially when it comes to women, like the slowest car. You can only go as fast as the slowest car in front of you. So sometimes we are that, and I think that we learn a lot from each other. I see in the reform movement that there's been this need for, not necessarily engagements in halacha, that's not in Jewish law at all, but a reimmersion in Jewish texts, which I think went away for a long time, and in the Jewish community, a real awareness of the world, and in the Orthodox community, including Orthodox rabbis talking to non-Jewish other clergy, which for many decades didn't happen at all. And so, we see a learning on both sides, and it's not that we're coming together to be the same. I don't think that will ever happen, but I think that there's what to learn from both sides of the community.
And you have rabbis even in Toronto, which is a very, very right-wing conservative community. You have Rabbi Daniel Koropkin, who is the rabbi at the Bayit Synagogue, one of the biggest Orthodox synagogues in the world. He himself wears a black hat on Shabbat, maybe during the week. But he will sit on a panel with a conservative reform rabbi, or he will even go visit the shul, I don't think for the services perhaps, but for a program. And he's castigated for that.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing that he's castigated for that, because I mean, we say Am Yisrael Chai. I say Am Yisrael Chai 20 times a day.
Yeah,
And I don't know what it means to say Am Yisrael Chai if you're saying you're in my but you're not.
yeah. So a number of years ago, we have the original Jewish feminist, Blue Greenberg,
Hmm.
who was irked by a number of different things within Judaism and the world. And therefore, she set about trying to fix them. One of the things that really bothered her was Orthodox women upset that they weren't involved in crucial decision making around the table. A second thing was aguna, which you mentioned before,
Hmm.
which is a cruel, cruel thing. You're right, that has happened within Judaism. Again, whereby a man, he takes the initiative for the divorce, and if he doesn't want to divorce a woman, he doesn't have to. Although there's a subtext there as well. So she started an organization of which you are the executive director of today, and it's called JOFA, or the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. You've been in that
Hmm.
for about 5 years, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So congratulations on that.
thank you.
There's so much here. There's so much to unpack. So let's start at the beginning, the genesis here. What, in your mind, was the role of women in Judaism?
So I grew up, once we became from, I grew up in the Chabad community where, other than a woman, let me say it different. Women led for women with almost no exception, other than where a man was needed. So, I could learn, I could teach, I could be a youth group leader, I don't know, I traveled to 770 to see the Rebbe. Like, there was not, right? And the Rebbe was also um, sat with women, right? I mean, I'm not saying like had tea or coffee with women, but like in the years that he was alive, that he gave out dollars, right? I had the same 30 seconds with him as any man. Maybe sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. It didn't really dawn on me that like women were marginalized until I was older, and I saw, some of my like some women I knew who um were actually agunot, or who were threatened to be agunot because they weren't sure that their husbands were going to show up at Beit Din, at the Jewish courthouse, to deliver the Jewish divorce. And so that was where I saw like the first real iniquities. There were other iniquities that I saw. If you compare my high school curriculum in what we called Torah Sheba'al Peh, which was, a few Mishnayot, and then one year one teacher photocopied a sheet of Gemara, which was like eye opening, compared to my brother who went to Ner Israel when it first opened in the north. Um, I don't think that they ever studied Mishnah. I mean, I think maybe they studied Mishnah when they were like in grades 3 or 4.
Correct.
But so there was like an awareness there of, we would study Mishnah and Nevi'im, and they were in the Gemara all day, which cuts both ways, right? Like, not all boys are meant to study Gemara all day, and women want to learn Gemara also. Um, I've lost track. What was the question?
Well, you're answering it. Where
Oh,
in
in
your
my own
mind,
life.
what
In my
was the
own life.
position of women in Judaism?
Sure. So once I finished high school, I started reading more because I lost that framework of having built-in Torah time. So I started learning more, what we would call like secondary text, right? I wasn't reading the Gemara, but I was reading um, Hatznei Lechet. Um, I'm blanking on the author. I was reading different books to be like, oh, this is why women cover their hair. This is why we dress a certain way. And once you start digging in, then you start asking questions. So for me, I left Toronto in 95. I spent 95, 96 in Montreal, where I did my master's degree at Concordia with Norma Joseph, who was Canada's premier Orthodox feminist thinker. And she was my mentor, and we are still close. Um, and and I watched from her like more questions to ask. Not that she was giving answers, but like just, raising this kind of awareness. I will say also the year that I was in Montreal was the year of the referendum when Quebec wanted to secede from Canada. So there were like a lot of layers of struggle for me in that year of what would it mean if I wanted to stay in Quebec and Quebec seceded. And I'm like sitting with all of these questions of what it is to be an Orthodox woman and how to be a fully present and fully accepted Orthodox woman. And I decided that Montreal was not for me. Montreal was wonderful for a lot of things, but it was not for me. Not to mention that there was one time that it was so cold that the gas froze in my tank of my car. So cold.
And they have great pastries too.
They do. Their
Good pastries.
knishes,
Yeah.
and their bagels.
Awesome. Yes.
Awesome.
Agreed.
Anyway, so I moved to New York where it was the first time that I actually had to look for my own community. When I lived in Montreal, I lived in my sister's basement, and I actually split my time between the Chabad and the Spanish Portuguese shul, where Norma Joseph's husband, Rabbi Joseph, Alav Shalom, was the rabbi there. So it was like, I had this like eye-opening experience of different kinds of like Orthodox prayer experiences. I moved to New York and I hung out with my friends and we were on the Upper West Side and I ended up going to the shul, which was called Kehilat Orach Eliezer, which was run by Rabbi David Weiss Halevny, Alav Shalom. And like the thing that he said that sticks with me till this day, and I didn't mention this when you asked me about working for the Reform movement, but he talked about the struggle between being able to pray with the people that you talk to. I'm sorry, not being able to pray with the people that you talk to and not being able to talk to the people that you pray with.
Yeah.
And so on balance, he would rather be with the people that he can pray with. And that was kind of something that stuck with me also. And so there was, I want to say like in 1997, there was a kind of general awakening of a few things happening at the same time. You ended up with the first JOFA conference. You ended up with a program called Torah Miriam, which became the precursor to Yeshivat Maharat, which we didn't know then, but that was kind of planting the seeds.
Of which you were
And
the first. You were the first fellow of, right?
of Torah Miriam, yes, and there was also the USED initiative was starting, which was a training of a group of women to be able to answer questions for other women related to what we call euphemistically Taharat HaMishpacha, but there's a lot of Jewish law issues that have to do with a married woman on her menstrual cycle and being able to use the mikvah or being able to be intimate with her husband. And so this was also an earth-shattering thing. There were a couple more things, but around the same time, all of these things kind of happened at the same time, which obviously, my ears were perked up. I was at Bernard Revel, and my friend Dov Weiss, who was Rabbi Avi Weiss's son, said to me, there's this conference in a couple of Sundays on Orthodox feminism. I think you would really like it. Why don't you come? So I grabbed my friend Natalie, and we went and we got there and they had a student rate. This is my story, and then I'll tell the backstory in a second. They had a student rate of $25, which at the time was my entire food budget for the week.
You were
But I
saying.
was like, I can't not do this. So I, reach into my pocket, pull out $25 and pay. And then when we walked out into the street, I found a $20 bill in the street.
Did you
So
really?
I did. So I was like,
Great story.
this is Hashem's way of watching out
That's a
for me.
great story. I love that. Yes.
But now that I know Blue, I know the backstory to all of that also. And as you said, Blue had been struggling. They had been there's a group of women who had been meeting at her dining room table every week where they had been kind of opining, what can we do? What can we change? And you mentioned one other thing that you didn't mention that she struggled with was Eruv, was if there was not an Eruv in the community, women were generally bound to be at home. And she writes about it in her book also that when she
What is
was
an Eruv, Daphne?
Thank you. So an Eruv is an artificial structure. It's actually a physical structure. Whether it's walls or you create an Eruv by a string, but it's a structure that encompasses an area that allows you to carry children, keys, books, whatever it is, from the private domain to the public domain. So if you're a woman with small children who need to be in a stroller and you want to go to synagogue and there's no Eruv, you're really stuck at home. The Eruv, we can have a whole separate conversation about this, is probably the most feminist intervention in Halacha, because it really freed women to be able to leave their homes on Shabbat while their husbands were at shul, whether they were at shul, even if they went to shul and ran back, that'd be one thing. But many times the menfolk hang out in shul, kiddush club, a little schnapps, another shear, and they're not rushing to come home. So the Eruv really allowed for women to leave the house and live their full Shabbat lives, whether it was going to shul, going to a shear, taking their kids to the park, whatever it was. But
The
blue,
the intervention of the Arab is
of
what.
the Avrum,
Yeah,
exactly, was
yeah.
what allowed that. So Blue would meet very often with friends around a dining room table, and there was one thing that actually really pushed them over the edge to say, like, it's time that we do something, and that is that there was a young girl in Queens who wanted to have her bat mitzvah and wanted to have women read from the Torah. And it turned into this whole to do where the whole Vod of Queens got together and said, this is not allowed, but nobody could say why, right? It's those moments of like, it's in our Masorah, it's not allowed, women don't do it, but nobody could actually point to why a girl couldn't read from the Torah. And one rabbi, Rabbi Simcha Kraus Alav Shalom, said, no, like this needs to be allowed. So it actually became like in the Jewish world front page news that this Vod of Queens came out against this young girl, except for Rabbi Strauss, and that pushed the registration for this conference over the top. So the story goes that there were 400 and some registrants on the Thursday before. It was on the President's Day weekend of 1997. So on Thursday, when they went to check things out, there were 400 and some registrations. And then on the Sunday, there were over 1,000 people who showed up.
Mhm.
So I was there. I was one of the first. And I just remember like everybody, you know, pulling chairs out of closets and breaking down walls, you know, those like collapsible walls
Yeah.
in ballrooms. And then when Blue gave the opening speech and used her words, which have become famous and infamous, you know, loved and revered and feared, of where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. The whole room stood up in standing ovation. It was just a moment where, you know, it was a moment that turned into a movement. And that people like me who are like, there must be others like me who are curious and questioning, found their people, 1,000 people, mostly women, but 1,000 people who were there for the same thing of raising this question of Orthodox feminism and how can we be better Jews? How can we be engaged in, you know, in more learning, in more ritual, and more leadership in the Orthodox community? We don't want to leave the Orthodox community. This is our community.
I was watching I Am Woman last night about Helen Reddy,
Mm-hmm. I've
and
not seen it.
you have to watch it. It's not a
Okay.
good movie. What she accomplished
Mm-hmm.
is enormous. Just the song I Am Woman kind of encouraged thousands, if not millions of women excuse me, around the world to start to take pride in who they are, to start recognize that, like you say, like you've written extensively about, can be part of the decision making. And it's magnificent. My question to you, though, is why do people in my family, Orthodox, maybe even construed as more ultra, why don't they see what you saw? Why didn't they ask questions?
I don't know your family. I think you and I are close-ish enough in age where I feel like so much of my childhood was also um, fear of intermarriage and fear of assimilation and fear of helping to finish off the work that Hitler started. And so there was a lot of fear-based driven um, Jewish engagement, for lack of a better term. Um, and uh, women, women were in the secular world have been behind, are still behind, are still not, you know, given the same status and recognition and pay and access to growth and all of that. And so in our tradition, which is very patriarchal, and I don't mean misogynistic. I just mean it's very patriarchal. All religion is patriarchal. So every religion has had its awakening. You know, the reform movement and the conservative movement are not so far behind, but because they went first, also I think there's this fear of like we can't be like them either. It's you know, in Israel, like the biggest insult you can give somebody who's not religious is that they're reform. Over here, it's a descriptor. You're reform. It's not an insult. You just are. There's this fear of being too much like them, and so what I see in my experience a lot is that the way that you designate your space in the Orthodox community and define yourself is based on how much access you give to women, and the more access you give to women, the more you look like them on the left, and people are fearful of that. Now, the downside to that is that, you know, this is like the Sarah Schneer argument of the woman who founded the Beis Yaakov movement in the 1920s in Eastern Europe, where um, women were becoming intellectual elites in all kind of other ways, and to leave them without the foundation and knowledge and love for Jewish tradition and Jewish text is a great failing. It's also insulting, quite frankly. Like, we're taught we're taught so much about the importance of being Orthodox. But if we're not given the tools, or if we are maligned for wanting to learn more, there's some kind of failing in the way that it's done today. The way that it had been done, like I said, women were just behind in everything. But today in 2024, there's not a reason to have that lag. I'm sorry, I don't know if you hear that clicking. My dog is here scratching his neck.
It's okay. My cat's right next to me.
Okay.
All right,
We
so
will introduce them.
let's let's break that down a little bit. There's a patriarchal component to every religion, agreed.
Mhm.
What I want to know what that means. So therefore, what? And number two is there's a halachic component to Judaism. Judaism is halacha, which
Mhm.
means Jewish law. And if you and I were to sit down at a table with a very, let's say, ultra Orthodox rabbi or teacher, he or she would walk us through the halacha, the Jewish law, having to do what's permissible for women or not. So there's those two pieces. Did they both work together or against the rights of women?
I think that if, for example, if you're an Orthodox woman and your space is an Orthodox shul, um, which means that it comes with a mechitza, a physical barrier that separates women and men. There are mechitzas that are, some people will say flat out that a mechitza is disrespectful and they'll never walk into an Orthodox shul. Fine, then Orthodoxy is not for you, and that's okay.
What is
But
a
for me,
mechitza? What is a
a
mechitza?
mechitza so it's a barrier. Sometimes it's a partition, sometimes it's a balcony, sometimes it's a full-on wall.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they shove you in a back closet or a stairwell and say you can stand here.
During prayer in a synagogue.
During prayer in a synagogue, and specifically in a synagogue, it's really important to note, because separate prayer isn't required in non-synagogue spaces. Not everybody knows that. I'll just tell a quick story before I come back to the rest of it. When I was a graduate student at Bernard Revel, I audited a Talmud class. It was actually the first time that I was like studying Talmud with a sefer, with Surah Daf, with the sefer, with everything. And I was the only woman in the class. And at the end of class, one of the students said, "Oh, should we just have mincha here?" So I took my sitter and I stood in the doorway and I davened mincha. And when I came back, my teacher, Rabbi Elman Alav Shalom, said, "Daphne, is it your plan to daven mincha with the class here every week?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he looked at the class and he said, "I just want to make clear that Daphne is not moving from her seat unless she chooses to, because this room does not have the status of a Beit Knesset, and she doesn't need to move. You will daven mincha with Daphne in the middle of the classroom, and that'll be that." And that to me was also like, oh, Taka, I never actually knew that. I just assumed that when you have men praying that a woman needs to step out. And so that was like an awakening for me. But there are shuls that I actually won't go into if I know that this is how it's structured. If I can't hear and I can't see, then you don't really care if I'm there. And it's just disrespectful to me to not have a proper sight line or being able to hear at all. And so those shuls are not for me. And there's shuls that have come a long way, including hiring architects and having women on the planning committee to be like, okay, we're going to have mechitza. We're going to have this barrier. What is it going to look like? Now, some synagogues historically historically for the aesthetic and for the way the houses of worship were designed at the time in general, and because of the architectural footprint, are in a balcony. And so because the space is so small, and if you want to have women, they need to be up. I don't always love a balcony, but that's me. Everybody has some people prefer it. Some women prefer it because they can see better. I prefer where the barrier is down the middle, and we have a kind of side by side experience. And of course, where I'm able to see and hear. And so those kind of spaces are respectful places for women to be at. And oftentimes, those kinds of synagogues have roles for women, whether beyond the Kiddush committee, right? They might be like in the program committee, they for sure in the Chesed committee. That's always a thing, and they might be asked advice in other life cycle spaces. But there are ways to include women in synagogue and to demonstrate that you care that women are there. And those are the kind of communities that I think, can be modeled more extensively across the country, across the world.
Is it, or has it been very humiliating for you, for other women, to go through all that, to go into a synagogue where there is no sight line, to not allow women to be presidents of synagogue? How humiliating is that? Because as a man, I'm allowed in everywhere. So
Right.
I have no idea how you feel.
Well, not just that, but like, oftentimes when people say, I'm looking for a 10th person,
Yeah.
right? You need 10 men for a quorum in order to be able to say certain prayers. By the way, I will say that minyan, which is the name for the quorum of 10 men, is a halachic construct that allows for certain prayers to be recited. But as we learned during the pandemic, everybody's prayer counted anyway.
Yeah.
It was just about Kaddish and Kedusha and Aliyot LaTorah, certain prayers that require a quorum of 10. Otherwise, you never actually need a quorum of 10. But when in the language, when people talk about, I'm looking for a 10th person, that's the part that's dehumanizing. I have, there are times that I'm embarrassed for the shul itself. I don't feel humiliated. But when people say I'm looking for a 10th person, I'm like, you mean a 10th man?
Yeah.
And I'm very particular about using that kind of language. I'll tell you that I was once in a shul. I was in Midtown Manhattan, and I came upon a shul that I must have walked by there 100 times, never knew that it was a shul. And I just happened to look up and see the stained glass windows and paid attention to where I was. And the guy in front said, can I help you? Are you looking for something? And I said, actually, I'm here for mincha. I, I, I happen to love mincha because it's concise and it hits all the important points.
Afternoon services.
The afternoon services, thank you. And so he's like, well, we don't really have a women's section. Now they did, but I'm sure the building was so dilapidated that it was probably unsafe for women to go up on that balcony. So I stood kind of in the foyer. And then a younger man came up, and it was all men. It was like 100 men. It was in the workday, so like this is where the men went for their afternoon prayers on their afternoon break. There's a younger guy, in his 30s, 40s, who everybody else was older, much older, came over and said, actually, I do have a spot for you. So I follow him, and he puts me in a stairwell where there's like the mop, the bucket, the cleaning supplies, and like the walls are covered with mold. And I was like, huh, I don't think that he thinks what this means. He was trying to be respectful by saying, you don't have to stand in the foyer, come and be with us. I think that there was like other ways that the place could have been structured to allow for a woman and still abide by halacha. But that to me was like an embarrassment for them, right? Like you should respect women and it should be a place where everybody is welcome. And to say, you know what, come and stand over here in the back of the room in this moldy stairwell with the mop and the bucket to me was a failure on their part, not a humiliation on my part.
It's quite fascinating that when you study halacha, Jewish law, or even a little bit, as I have, to arrive at a conclusion, and this is according to Maimonides, who was one of the greatest sages in Jewish history, that women leading services really is not so bad at all. In fact, it's permissible. Here's a couple of notes that I took out of your website, which is excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's an outstanding website.
Thank you. Thank you.
So when can women be part of leading the service? Well, parts for which there is no reason to forbid women's leadership. Typically, these parts may be left out of the service or maybe even led by a child. Okay. Parts of the service for which there is a reason to think that women's leadership would be problematic. Devorim shibik dusha, holy words. Sections that involve positive time-bound commandments or in which the leader fulfills the congregation's obligation, etc., but for which women leadership is in fact explicitly licensed among some halachic decisors. Now, there are certain authorities who say, no, that's okay, that part. Parts where women are apparently barred from fulfilling the congregation's obligation, though even here, halachic solutions can be advanced. Like you were saying before, Blue Greenberg stood up and said, if we're dealing with halacha, there's always a way to figure this stuff out.
Yep.
But here you are, you're now the director of JOFA, this organization whose central motif really is to gain rights for Orthodox women. and you're convinced this is the right thing to do. Did you have to ensconce yourself in the learning of Jewish law in order to fulfill or push forward your mission? Or would you say you're somewhat of a halachic expert in these areas?
So I will say a couple of things. Number one, the first thing that I will say that wherever decisions are being made, women have to be at the table, especially
Yeah.
where it involves them. Even where it doesn't involve them. Trust me that there are plenty of places that men make decisions about women where women are not uh, invited to the table, and so women have to be there always.
Even as
And
president of the synagogue.
even as president of the synagogue, and more. In the it's interesting because like people assume that in modern Orthodoxy that they're like great advances, but in modern Orthodoxy there's still this holdout of they don't like for women to be president of the synagogue. I think in some part because there develops this automatic closeness between the president and the rabbi, and so
Oh,
right? Like you just have to spend a lot of time talking together to
how
each other and
interesting.
being
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And so some synagogues have created a model where they have co-presidents, where they have a man and a woman co-president. So this way, it's not this like one-on-one in-depth relationship. It becomes this more of a chabura rather than a chavruta, more of a group than a one-on-one. Um,
So
but even
that's an issue of what we would call tzniut, right? Which is modesty. Am I correct?
yes, uh, societal norms are it's in part snoot. It's some people might say that it's more of a geder, more of like a fence around the Torah. So it's like a little bit of both. And so we see in some synagogues that they have co-presidents, like a man and a woman, working with the rabbi. And the rabbi, by the way, is almost always a man. There are, I can count basically on one hand that there are a number of growing number of synagogues, but still on one hand of where women are the sole or co-clergy in Orthodox shuls. And that's something actually that we help to fund in synagogues in North America, who will hire an Orthodox woman in an Orthodox synagogue to be a spiritual leadership role. Um, there's also something about historically the boardroom had always been men, and so to include women in the boardroom was one step, and to have them serve as president is another thing. In terms of Jewish law, people use the term srara, which has to do with women's leadership. It really has to do with women's leadership on the battleground in
Mhm.
making military decisions, but it has been expanded to all kinds of other roles. And it's something that in increments there are changes being made. Um, the first time that every synagogue opens up a role like shul president to a woman, it creates a whole wave of discomfort that by the end people are like, it's not such a big deal. She actually did a great job. And let's be honest, most people don't actually want the job of synagogue president.
Correct.
So to have
True.
somebody who wants it, whether it's a man or a woman, like please take it. If you're gonna want it and love it and do it well, God be with you. Go and do it.
But you're not answering my question.
Hmm.
Have you ensconced yourself in the study of halacha
Oh,
having to do with what you do?
so the answer is yes. I this is not humble brag. I don't consider myself an expert. I'm an eternal student. There are certain halachic issues that I have more expertise on than others. But the answer is I'm a believer in learning from the ground up. So whether it's learning the text or stepping into the role, I'll give you a different example. We had a crisis in our community where we were short of mashgichim and mashgichot, the kosher supervisors in restaurants. And in Silver Spring, it happens to be that for decades before it became the norm anywhere else, women served as mashgichot, kosher supervisors in both in synagogues and in like catering halls and restaurants. And so um, there's a kosher restaurant here where the owner said, "Look, we'd love to stay open, but we can't because we don't have anybody to come and be mashgiach or mashgicha." And so I was like, "Well, how hard can this be?" So I had to learn some of the relevant halachos specific to this restaurant and become designated a mashgicha by the Stark, which is like the overseeing entity here. And then I went and I was a mashgicha for an evening. And I want to say it's not glorious work at all.
No.
Anybody who says that hashgacha is a version of srara has never been a mashgiach or mashgicha in their life. But that was something that I learned from the startup because I felt like I mean, from the ground up, because I felt like I couldn't step in and do it without knowing. There are other issues that are more specific to women's issues that I do have more expertise in. From the day-to-day ritual to abortion access, which is a big deal in this country, not in Canada. And those are some of the things that I teach. You mentioned at the start that I'm an adjunct professor of Jewish law at Georgetown Law School. And so I teach a lot about the very different lived experiences of women, depending on the interpretation of various passages in the Talmud and how they're applied in their communities and day schools and whatnot. And how if one of the line where it talks about how a father teaches his daughter Torah, it's as though he teaches her the word is tiflut, and that word is open to all kinds of interpretation from nothingness to promiscuity, but also points to the fact that there was a tradition that fathers taught their daughters Torah in the times of the Talmud. So these are all things that, quite frankly, we should all be immersed in, and to be able to educate ourselves and those around us better. And also, this is, we are the people of the book, and then how dare we not know the book, right?
So I want to send out accolades to Professor Dr. Rabbi Marty Lukshin. You know Marty?
I do. He grew up, we grew up around the corner. I shouldn't say we grew up. I grew up around the corner living from him. He was my professor at York University, and his wife, Ruthie, we actually took a class together. And I actually just met his son for the first time as an adult last week in
Very
New York.
good.
Yes.
So we're working on setting up an interview as well.
Wonderful.
I have great respect for that man. One of the things that he brought to Toronto is what's called the Partnership Minyan.
Mm-hmm.
And I attended it. And the Partnership Minyan, halachically, according to Jewish law, and correct me if I go off track here, allows women to lead the services and participate in the services in ways which would not be allowed in Haredi communities, ultra-Orthodox communities.
Even in a mainstream modern Orthodox
or even the mainstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I went there and I'm privy to a woman leading us in the opening prayers, which we call Psuke de Zimra.
Mm-hmm.
And that was okay. And I'm privy to them leading aspects of the service as we go. We get to the Torah. Remind me, are they allowed to read from the Torah? Women are allowed
They're allowed to read from the Torah, but the first three aliyot go to
only
men.
the first three.
Mm-hmm.
So package this for us, Daphne. How did this come about, and why those things?
So if you look at Kabbalat Shabbat, which is recited on Friday night, and Psuke de Zimra, those are basically psalms.
Yeah.
So chapters from Tehillim, from Psalms, and there's no barrier for anybody. Anybody can read from that. So there is no barrier, and so women can lead. Where people find discomfort is hearing a woman's voice out loud as a singular voice, which is a separate conversation, but it doesn't actually apply to prayer in this way. And so it's revolutionary. The Torah reading, historically, there has been women reading for the Torah for other women, well before the Partnership Minyan happened. And so the Rabbi Sperber wrote a tshuva about kavod habriot, about respect for all creation, and how in this space women are the same as men and can read Torah for the community. And so it just, it's not, I will say it's not normative yet. I will say that most major Jewish communities have a partnership minyan or two. Toronto has a couple. We have one here in Silver Spring. I was actually the scholar in residence for a newly created organization called Shalshelet Shivyoni, which is the college network of students who are interested in Orthodox, egalitarian, and partnership minyan. And we'd have that Shabbaton right before Pesach, and there were, I think, 80 college students there from campuses across the country, which was also such a great thing for them, given the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses. This was really like a safe space for them physically and spiritually. I will say that there are many people who are uncomfortable with it, but still will show up if they're invited to a simcha. So it's this yes and. I will tell you that in my own house, I mentioned I have two daughters. My older daughter was not interested in Torah reading. She was interested in a chesed project. And my younger daughter, all she wanted to do was read from the Torah. Now, when she told us this, I looked at my husband and I said, do we need to do two bat mitzvah weekends, one for her for what she wants and one to appease our families, because neither of our families
Yes.
are into the partnership minyan? And he said, no, this is what she wants. This is going to be the weekend. We're going to invite everybody, and people will come or not come, or come for whatever pieces that they want. And for the relatives who stepped into a partnership minyan for the first time ever, they were blown away. So she didn't read the whole parsha. We actually divided amongst family members, my spouse, me, the bat mitzvah girl, and a couple of neighbors. And we gave out the aliyot to whoever was willing to take an aliyah at a partnership minyan. But those who didn't actively participate and came were kind of blown away that there was this opportunity for this bat mitzvah girl to really step into her own as a full bat mitzvah, and to just it was however you felt about being in a partnership minyan, everybody kvelled for this girl who did this tremendous thing in the same way as they would for any 13-year-old boy who
Yes.
would have done their tremendous thing.
It must be damn lonely for you, no? Doing what you do.
I often say that it is a very lonely place to be an Orthodox feminist, because from the left we get you're upholding the patriarchy, and from the right, when there are real crises for Orthodox women, whether it's abortion access or aguna, they sit silent and don't do the things that they can and should be doing. Because whether it's abortion access or addressing the aguna issue, no woman's life should be placed at risk, and
Yes.
both have the ability to do that. And so, in that sense, it's very lonely. And I'm blessed to have a strong network of family and friends who hold me and nurture me and support me. But also, I just want to say it's a lonely time to be a Jewish person on this planet.
Yes, it is. How do you come to grips with your awful feminist sisters and their silence? Not all of them, but a lot of them.
A
Just
lot of them.
you
A
said,
lot
you
of
know what
them.
you said, Daphne? You said, "Me too," unless you're a Jew.
Unless you are a Jew. I did not make that up. I did not make up that quote. It's something that we saw on October 8th already, when people were already denying the sexual violence that women experienced on October 7th, and people continued to deny.
What's up?
And
What's up with that?
it's anti-Semitism. That's what it is. It's anti-Semitism. In no other community, in no other part of the world, in no other atrocity are people saying we need to hear the testimony of
Yeah,
victims. We need to see the proof. We need, right? And by the way, there is proof, right? Hamas
it's the
videotape,
GoPro.
right?
It's
They
the
had the
GoPro.
GoPro. They had the GoPro. We have a number of survivors from Nova and from the kibbutzim who have also had to step forward to testify. I met with one of the heads of Zaka, which is the volunteer organization of people who go and uh, collect bodies and body parts when there are accidents, when there are terrorist attacks, and certainly when they're here on October 7th. I should say they're on October 7th. And they don't generally collect pictures, but they knew in their gut that the world was going to deny or demand proof that they happened and that this happened, and they have the proof, and the world still denies. The it's pure anti-Semitism. It's nothing else than that.
But can you, Daphne? I hear you, but go a little bit deeper. You said that you really regretted putting the years of work you did into working with many of these organizations and these women. What changed in their head? Why do they hate Jews so much? Where's the sisterhood?
So I want to say that I don't regret the work that I did, because I think that when you go in with good intent, and you go in to help people, that piece I don't regret. I regret how things turned out, at least for now, um, with the feminist community. It is a much longer conversation over how the world turned upside down and how the more liberal you are in the world, the more aligned you are with Hamas, which makes, like, I say the words and I hear them. They make zero sense whatsoever. And I'm scared for them that they're going to learn the hard way, in the way that we did on October 7th. And when Hamas says that they hate Jews and they will come and, do October 7th again and again, that eventually, God forbid, they should be successful in their efforts. But it won't end with the borders of the state of Israel, right? Hamas is out to destroy the Jews in the state of Israel, but I think is out to destroy Western society in general, in conjunction with Hezbollah and the Houthis and all of the other Iranian-backed terrorist groups. And somehow the liberal world doesn't see that. That's anti-Semitism. That's also, I think, um, we can thank our friends at whoever's populating TikTok and other social media search engines and the algorithms, that there are more anti-Semites in the world than there are Jewish people, and the algorithm always wins out. So, it is still shocking to me till this day that when I say something, the response I get back is, well, I saw on TikTok. And I'm like, I don't know why you believe an anonymous person on TikTok over somebody who you've known for 5, 10, 20 years, who says different. So we live in a real upside down world where somehow Hamas became the darlings and we are not.
I was interviewing Simon Mamon, whose husband is a 47-year-old IDF soldier. They live in Richmond Hill, in northern part of Toronto. And I asked her, she's a very articulate human being, very accomplished. I asked her, I said, why do the non-Jews hate Jews so much? Her response was, I don't care. I don't care. My job is to strengthen the Jewish people. So
Yeah.
do you care, or is your job to strengthen the Jewish people?
My job right now is to strengthen the Jewish people. People ask me when I write, when I post, when I speak, who am I talking to? And there is so much undoing of the gaslighting that we've been experiencing since October 7th, that if that is all that I can do in that day, that is what I care about the most. If I am able to bring along non-Jewish people who are stop and think and say, oh, I never thought of it this way, then that's a win also. I've mentioned a few times abortion in this country, which is a really big deal. We are about to be on the 2-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which was the Supreme Court decision that stripped away women's rights to be able to access the medical care in every form, including, mostly it was about abortion access, but
Constitutional right.
Yes, the constitutional right to abortion access. And the fact that I've now started calling it out. Like, if you cried in June 2 years ago when the Dobbs decision was made, and you're not crying about these women who are being held hostage by Hamas, some of whom may be pregnant, and they have lost all their bodily autonomy, then you need to put down your feminist hat, because you're just not.
Have you stopped talking to some feminists, rather
Oh my
than
gosh.
they stopped talking?
So I would
did you make that
say,
decision?
yes, there are people who I've in the feminist world and also in the multi-faith world.
Yeah.
I have many Muslim and Christian friends who I just can't talk to anymore. They, the fact that they don't see that when they post things that are terrible and also untrue about Israel, that it draws a straight line from their post to attacking my synagogue, right? Or to attacking the kosher grocery wherever. My synagogue wasn't fully attacked. There's it's now being adjudicated in court, where there was a fellow who twice came by and ripped down the Israeli flag that hung in the front of the shul. All of these, like, saying terrible things about Israel, about the IDF, about Israelis, about all of the chanting from the river to the sea. It just opens up anti-Semitism. It empowers people to be anti-Semitic stateside, and the fact that they don't see that means that they don't care about me, and I don't have room in my life for people who don't care about me right now.
Tell us the one story, though, of the Muslim who continued to befriend you.
The Muslim who continued to befriend me. There is one who and they're struggling, right? It's also it's I will say this. I was in Israel on October 7th with my family. We were
Yeah.
there for Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And on October 8th and 9th and 10th, I had a number of my Muslim friends reach out to say, I hope everything's okay with your family. And I would say, it's not just my family. I am here too. And they were blown away. They just didn't realize how real. I think like it was at that moment that it clicked for them that Israel is a real part of my life. It's not this like theoretical out there. It's a place I go to several times a year. My kids live there. My friends live there. My family lives there. Everybody is like family there. And so they were all really panicked that I leave right away. And then one by one, I watched them post really terrible things on social media. I have one friend who I still count as a friend, but I think that they are scared to be more vocal about their support for the Jewish community. I think that they're hoping that this dies down and that there might be some other opportunity to engage with the next wave of Jews and Muslims who are willing to sit down together. But I think for right now, Jewish-Muslim engagement is over for now.
Yes, I've heard for many people. What's it like to be a mother of an IDF soldier?
Oi. First of all, tremendous pride. Tremendous pride. This is what she wanted. I have to say, my daughters, you'll be shocked to hear, are like scrappy, independent women. So this daughter did all of her Aliyah paperwork by herself. She's a lone soldier. She's part of the Garin Sabar program. She did all of that paperwork by herself, and all of her medical testing, like everything that she needed to do, she did by herself. And so the fact that when she set out that she wanted to do this, she did everything on her own. I had to sign some power of attorney papers right before she made Aliyah. So like, I'm just proud that I raised functional human beings who, see the thing that they want to do and then make their way to do it on their own. So incredibly proud. It's obviously a complicated moment as a parent living on the other side of the world, even if I live there, to be a parent of an Israeli soldier. She's right now in the very early stages of basic training. So I have some calm about me. She's surrounded by really great people there. Overall, like, I'm sure that there are going to be moments where I'm stressed and nervous, but it's just pride right now. She's now a daughter of the people.
How does your husband feel?
Same, like just so proud. He was actually just there for a week and was able to spend some time with her, and to see her in uniform, it's a beautiful thing. It really
Is he a cool guy?
thing.
Cool guy, your husband?
He's a really cool guy. He's he's like the town mayor around here. Everybody knows him.
Yeah.
Also, the Prices are like legacy family around here, so it's like a yechus of a different kind. But he's he and I don't always agree politically, and people don't often get a little bit uncomfortable around our Shabbat table when we butt heads very publicly. But as I say, we give each other the room to be the people that we need to be. We don't always align, and when we do, it's great, and when we don't, it's okay.
How long have you been married?
25 years.
Yeah. Do you guys fight at all?
Every day.
You fight every day. I guess that clears the air. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Look, it's communication. It's communication.
What do you love about this man?
His heart. He has a big, generous heart.
And you saw that from the beginning?
From the beginning. I mentioned that he was my one and only blind date. We went out on a Wednesday night, and then on Thursday he called and said, "Do you want to come for Shabbat?" And I was like, "That is just a weird thing to ask somebody when."
Man. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I said, "Actually, my brother and his friends are coming," and he was like, "Bring them all." And I was like, "No, we're gonna make Shabbat here, and you'll have your Shabbat, and maybe we'll see each other next week." And then fine. And then he called back an hour later, and he was like, "Well, I'm going grocery shopping. Do you need me to pick anything up for you?" And we lived a block and a half apart from each other on the Upper West Side. And I was like, no, I can do this. But like now that I know him, and, like it felt weird. It felt like an overstep. Now that I know him, like anytime he goes to Home Depot, anytime he goes to the supermarket, anytime he goes anywhere, there's like a roster of people who he calls to say, "I'm going to Costco. I'm going to Home Depot. Do you need anything? Can I get you anything?" And that's just his personality. Yeah.
Love that. Are you like that?
He's more like that.
I'm the opposite. I never let anyone know. Not even my son. What does he love about you?
I'm gonna say my brain. I don't know.
Your intellect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have a very warm soul. I'll tell you, you're a lovely person. Really.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
I so enjoyed this. I want to dedicate this. I should have done this at the top, but I'll do it now. I want to dedicate this interview with Daphne Lazar Price, my new friend, to an officer of the elite Yamam counterterrorism unit who was killed rescuing the 4 hostages yesterday. Was it yesterday, Saturday?
It
Saturday
was
morning.
yesterday. Yep, Saturday morning.
Uh, his name is Arnon Zmora, 36, from Stay David, and he's survived by his wife and 2 children. And after his death was announced, the name of the hostage rescue operation in which he was killed was changed from Seeds of Summer to Operation Arnon in his memory. The 4 rescued hostages, Noah Argamani, 26, Almog Meir John, 21, Audrey Kozlov, 27, and Shlomi Ziv, 40. They were abducted from the Supernova Music Festival. You know, these stories run very deeply because the one of them, Shlomo Ziv, I believe it was, perhaps not. One of them, as they were rescued, and his aunt went to tell this former hostage's father, and his father was dead.
It was Almog, I think.
It was Almog.
Yeah.
His father was dead. His father died from grief and heartache.
Just that morning.
Just that morning.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. Like, these people are sacrificing so much, not only for themselves, but for Jews everywhere. And I often say, I give a shiur on Thursday night, a class in Chumash, and I'll say here, we have to be so grateful to the IDF for their courage and bravery and that of their family, because they're not only fighting for Israeli brothers and sisters, but they're fighting for us.
They're fighting for all of us.
Right, Daphne?
100%. And I will say, to wake up this morning and to really absorb what happened yesterday, and to be a Jewish person and to feel the joy at the rescue of the 4, and then recognize the bittersweetness of the fact that Noah Argamani is going to visit her mother, who's not well, and Almog, who lost his father, and the captain who fell in the line of duty. Is, this is what it means. There's nothing so whole as a broken heart. That this is what it is to be a Jewish person today.
Are you a crier?
I didn't used to be, but now it just comes
me too.
from nowhere.
Me too.
Yeah.
Is there a beautiful song, even a few lines of it, something that you love dearly and that just brings your heart out, that you can sing us a few lines?
Oh, I'm not a singer. It's not a Kolisha thing. I'm just not a singer.
any like a poem or something? I've been asking my guests lately to finish the show with something beautiful that they like. I should have prepared you before. I apologize.
Yes, that's okay. My favorite lines in Tanakh are from Kohelet.
What's Tanakh, by the way?
Tanakh is the compilation of the 5 books of Moses, the Book of Prophets, and the other writings, the Ketuvim. And in Kohelet, in the Book of Ecclesiastes, I'm not going to remember the exact words, but the lines are Tovim Ashnayim min echad. The 2 are better than one, as they have a good reward for their labor. For if the one falls, go to him who does not have another to pick him up. I might have botched that translation exactly, but what it means is that all of us are better together, and none of us should ever have to stumble alone.
Are you good by yourself?
I enjoy my moments of solitude, and then I am aware when I actually need to step out of the inertia that comes from being in solitude, and to really go out and be out in the world and be with people, which nourishes me in all kinds of ways.
Is it too quiet with your girls in Israel?
It is quiet with them in Israel, not just because they left, but it became a vacuum. All of their friends left with them.
Oh, yes.
So it is. It's sometimes too quiet.
Daphne Lazar Price, thank you so much for being my guest. You were marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been so great to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that what you do is really, really special. You're a person who's very important to our history.
We'll see.
Do you ever feel that way? Like, do you feel as though you've made palpable change?
I like to hope that I made some positive steps in a lot of people's lives.
What would be the biggest, or the one that you're most impressed with yourself?
I'm just going to look inward, and I just want to say that I am exceedingly proud of the 2 girls that I helped to put into the world,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to see the change that they're going to make.
Kol hakavod.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and for watching. It was really great to have you. We have some great guests coming up, really fascinating individuals whose work is of humanitarian nature, work around the world to do beautiful things in the context of enhancing our world, our lives. And once again, as I said to you at the beginning of this interview, watch the interview, listen very closely, sometimes close your eyes and hear what Daphne has to say in terms of the changes that were required in the Jewish world amongst women, but not only for women, right? For men as well. We've all benefited from her work and from the work of her organization and those who came before her. Really learn from that and enhance your own life. Work really hard to find that zone that's particular to you, because when you do, life is so sweet, isn't it? It's nice, isn't it?
It is.
It really is. So I look forward to being with you again, and I thank you so much for joining us. I'm Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives. Daphne Lazar Price, thank you once again.
Thank you.